Good evening and welcome to the Vintage House Show on WNUR 89.3 FM Chicago, Evanston. Welcome to the Street Beat Show, which airs every weeknight from 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the morning on 89.3 on WNUR.org. We're in HD as well these days, so we're sort of moving on up and getting stronger signals. So great news for WNUR. Today we are interviewing a wonderful Chicagoan who has a really unique perspective on house and techno. As you know, the Vintage House Show really uncovers and dissects and preserves the history of house music and all the different genres that have been birthed from the original music genre. And today we have DJ Hiroko Yamamura. She is a Chicagoan, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here today and to be on such an amazing show. So can't wait to talk.
Well, I hope to maybe get you into the studio at some point. I didn't realize, we could have. We're back in the studio now. Are you in Chicago right now?
I am in Chicago on the west side.
I would have loved to have had you inside of the studio. We could have done this in person. And maybe sometime in the future, you will come out with friends and just hang out with us in studio safely.
I would love to. It's been a while since I've been over there. So really looking forward to that.
That's great. I would love to hear your WNUR history. It's always interesting when I think about the greats. I was a former DJ while I was in college a long time ago. And we had Frankie Knuckles in studio just talking to him. He didn't spin or anything. We just talked to him. And so that's sort of...
When was that?
This was 1985.
Amazing.
That, even though I'm 21, Hiroko, I was there when we were doing Frankie Knuckles.
I was guessing 20, but 21, I'll buy that.
Exactly. I'll buy that. Same deal. So Hiroko, give me a little bit, we're a pretty hyper local show. We're going to start with the very beginnings. And if you're a Chicagoan, if you remember some time ago, the last election cycle, there was a judge, this Irish judge who was running for judge in Chicago, a Southwest Sider. And at the beginning of her commercial, she said, "I was born in St. Rush's Parish Hospital," or something like that. I was like, whoa. She's proving her Chicagoanness, right? I was like, you got to go to the hospital. I was like, wow, that's amazing. But tell me your beginnings. Where were you born and what community did you grow up in? And give me those things.
So I was actually born in Charleston, South Carolina, before I came over to Chicago. Yeah, I had the whole Southern drawl and everything before coming to the Midwest. It's a funny story. My parents actually were Japanese family, and so my parents really didn't speak English all that well either. So the fact that they had identified the Southern drawl as something that I needed to correct was always something I found funny, because of course you don't hear your own accent, right? So then I move out to the suburbs. I am, it's hard to call yourself a Chicagoan when you grew up in the Southwest suburbs, but I did spend most of my time in musical knowledge in the city. So I was really into skateboarding. And so I happened to stop by the store Wax Trax, which was on Lincoln Avenue. And that really was kind of, skateboarding was also very linked into music and subculture and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, like industrial music and Wax Trax was really kind of popping off as a very strong Chicago sound, kind of in tandem with house music and sometimes crossing over. And that's really where I kind of started really thinking about music differently. And it wasn't just this kind of background thing anymore. And it really became part of kind of subculture and how I identified and how I related to the city, because it was very much a Chicago sound at the same time. So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that detail. What southwest suburb did you grow up in?
I grew up in a, we moved around a lot. So I lived in Western Springs, Hinsdale, and LaGrange Park. So um, kind of not the most interesting places to grow up. So you kind of very quickly look for stimulation and culture and kind of friends outside of there. And luckily, it was one of those suburbs that was near a train line that I could get downtown and um, go do things very quickly. So
So you did things exactly like Chicagoans do generally. I mean, what happens is even those who grew up in the city took the L, took the train to wherever it is they had to get to the club, whether it was west, north, south, wherever it was. So we did a fantastic exhibit some time ago at the Old Town School of Folk Music, and it was entitled L Tracks and Alleyways, because that's how you got to the different places, right? And that's how you got into
absolutely.
some of the clubs too, through the alley, which terribly dangerous. We never should have done that. So, okay, so you suggested that the skateboard culture sort of brought you into a unique and a different music scene than you might have heard. Talk to me a little bit about your family and music. Did you hear a lot of music in your household? Were you exposed to pop music, cultural types of musics?
Yeah, so growing up, I kind of did the typical Asian journey and had to play violin against my own will. It's funny. So I did something called Suzuki Method since I was very young, which is a method of not reading music. It's basically they teach you to hear a song and play it back, right? So, uh, and when you start very early, reading music is also kind of possibly a hindrance for people. But it was actually problematic. So I actually never learned to read sheet music because of it. So I continued doing violin into like junior high, and I just pretended that I was reading sheet music because I was able to play things back by ear. And so to this day, I cannot read sheet music. I only play those things back by ear. And because it was something that I was kind of forced into, I rebelled against that pretty quickly. So in junior high, I decided as soon as my parents gave me the choice, it's like, you know what, I'm going to play guitar instead. So picked up a guitar in high school or junior high, and then never looked back on there. And then later that became drum machines and synthesizers and that whole addiction. So, um, and I had two older sisters growing up, and so they also kind of informed me about like 80s music and Duran Duran, and kind of told me what was cool at the time. And when I was in junior high is when like the the whole like shoegaze rock scene was going on, and in England there was all this kind of exciting stuff. And so I also had neighbors that were really informative about music. And um, in the suburbs we also had all these kind of like little punk rock venues popping up, and so there'd be shows. And you could see Green Day on the weekend for $5 at this place called McGregor's, and all these kind of legendary punk bands from Chicago were kind of forming in the late '90s, early 2000s. And yeah, it was a really good time to be a kid. So
That's fantastic. You know what we like to do here is sort of memorialize dates and venues, locations of those venues. So you said there were some little clubs that popped up in the south suburbs. You just mentioned McGregor's. What was it called?
there's a club. It was called. I don't know if you can't even call it a club. It was this dive bar in Elmhurst, and it was one of the few places you could go being under 18, right? And it was just this like dirty little bar that everybody went to. And they would just constantly have little punk rock shows, and sometimes it would be your friends, but sometimes some well-known bands would come through. And like we would go see Screeching Weasel all the time. I mentioned Green Day and Naked Ray Gun, all these early Chicago kind of punk clubs. and one of the early things for me also was there was I'm sure you know about Medusas, right? So unfortunately, I didn't make it to the original Medusas, but there was a second iteration at the Congress Theater, and they had early nights, so you could be all ages before a certain time. And what was great about this club is they had this like uh, industrial goth kind of alternative room. This is when alternatives started popping up. But on the other side was John Curley, Psychovich, and all these other kind of amazing house DJs going on. And so when I first started going in there, I was like, no, I'm really punk rock and goth rock and all these silly ideas going through my head about identity and culture and all that. But then you had to walk through the house room every time. And at first I'm like, this isn't cool. You know, this is like what all the trendy kids are doing. We're a counterculture and all that. But then I started kind of realizing that the whole alternative punk rock industrial scene was very like manufactured MTV sales pitch, right? And it was about fashion, and it was about selling you stuff. And the kids on the other side in the house room, they were really having a great time. They weren't as worried about how they were dressed, and they weren't dancing in their like fancy goth rock way. And so this Medusas, which from what I understand, the original Medusas was really where this kind of clash of cultures happened. But unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to see that. So this was maybe the watered down version, all of that. And I think I started going there mid 90s, late 90s. My memory is not as great as it should be, but that lasted for a little while. And also in Chicago, in the suburbs, south suburbs, there was a club called Jubilations that I think it's now the Harvey Expo Center, and I think it's actually turned into a strip club at this point. But back then, it was an all ages club that you could go to. It had like a juice bar license, and there was also a bar club called Off the Alley in Homewood, Tinley area, and that also was an all ages place that played just a mixture of music. And it's something that Chicago just doesn't have anymore. There's no more all ages clubs. So there's festivals, I think, and there's outdoor events, but there's no more like weekly things you can go and drink a soda pop at, and kind of and when you're a kid, you're not going there, of course, to drink liquor. They don't have liquor. The culture is different. So you were stuck to actually dancing and listening to the music. So I think I was very lucky to kind of run into that period, because that just doesn't exist anymore. It's not an outlet for kids now. So
it really is too bad. I mean, I don't know what's going on globally. I don't know what's going on nationally here. If there are small clubs in different places, and the Rust Belt or the East Coast, etc. But yeah, there used to be so many places that kids could go that their families felt safe at. Whether it was the roller rink that happened to have house music or music as well. We don't have any of those juice bars anymore. So that, to me, that sounds like an entrepreneurial opportunity for someone, by the way, because we don't have a bunch of house music clubs either. You know what I mean? So there's a whole lot that, so
it comes down to this, unfortunately, the city changed its laws, and I think it was focused on trying to stop a lot of these events. Like I think after raves and the anti-rave law had happened in Chicago, there was a concentrated effort to shut these bars down that I think really gave people an outlet. And if you ever went to them, none of the kids were drinking. Maybe I'm being a little innocent here, but as far as I could tell, this really was good, clean fun, right? That was focused on music. A lot of the people that I met throughout this time went on and continued in music and were really successful. So I think obviously the imprint of these venues made a big impression on them. So it's just too bad that I think structurally Chicago doesn't support those things anymore, right? They want to have these giant festivals that cost hundreds of dollars, and you know, you don't see the same person twice at them, so you don't make friends in the same way, and you don't kind of form those kind of musical cultural bonds in the same way. So yeah, it's interesting to see now kids that are kind of learning about electronic music and coming through the current offerings or entertainment offerings out there, how that's going to maybe influence them going forward.
You know, it really is too bad, but this gives us a great opportunity to bring up the ARC Festival, which you are performing at on Labor Day weekend at Union Park, which is
Yes,
right on Ashland and what, Madison, between Madison and Lake or so, or it's a big, pretty big park, right? So
it's a
right on.
pretty big park. It's a nice park too. So
So I definitely want to make sure we mention that, and we'll also talk about the ARC Festival at the end of the show, so folks know where to pick up tickets and where to enjoy your music and others. And we'll talk about some of the other performers who are colleagues and friends of yours, I'm sure. Um, but we're going to go back to that a little bit. So what we were saying. So
sure.
I'm just going to back a little bit as it pertains to sort of you personally. So you're in high school. So what high school did you go to?
I went to Lyons Township High School,
Lions,
which
I've heard
was
of Lions.
in LaGrange. Yeah,
And
it's an interesting place. It's an interesting place.
I wish we had more time. I would love to hear what you mean by interesting. Uh, but you know, the
It's
great
fun.
thing.
I'm sorry. Go
Go
ahead.
go ahead.
It's funny. It was like when the rave scene was really kind of popping off in the 90s, a significant amount of the people that were involved in producing raves, and they went to the same high school as me. I didn't find out about that a lot later,
Ah,
funnily, but the folks that really kicked off the rave scene as a company called ATP, we all went to high school together. They were maybe 6 years ahead of me or something. So I didn't really know any of them, but later I find out that they went to the same high school. So it's kind of
that's kind
funny.
of cool. I love that. My high school produced a lot of house music powerhouses. Steve Hurley, Lori Branch is one of
Amazing.
my co-hosts. I could go on and on. Guy who's a sound guy for the Chosen Few DJs, has been the sound guy for 20 years, 30 years in Chicago, a guy named Dwayne Woods. Went to Lynn Bloom Technical High School, which is in the middle of Inglewood in Chicago on the South Side.
Were you all
So
friends back then?
I was not, Steve Hurley is a little older than me. I was
Uh,
in love with Steve. His sister went to school. His sister was my same age. We ended up pledging.
okay, nice.
We're friends. But her big brother came to spin at our sock hop. I was like, oh my, who is that? You know, he was already out of school. They were like, that's Angie's brother,
Amazing.
Angie Hurley. She's super, also a phenomenal DJ. And if you look back on some of our podcasts, etc., you'll see a discussion with her and a group of women called the Fantastic Four back in the 90s,
Okay.
who formed a collective. But she's now a wonderful mother and teacher, not in Chicago anymore, but a great Lynn Bloom story. So I love stories about what we love is really to understand what was happening in different parts of town in Chicago, in house music, in music. Because what happens is sometimes the South Siders don't know what was really going on the West Side. North Side had its own community. The Latino community had its own, you know, sort of flow and vibe. Of course, the gay and lesbian LGBTQ culture had its own thing going on, and we were intermingling, but we really didn't understand what was consistently going on in some of these clubs and venues on different sides of town.
Sure.
So it's good to hear what was happening on the Southwest side where you were growing up. We heard a lot from Jesse De La Pena, who's given up his story, a guy named David Chavez, who was telling us a little bit about the Latinx, you know, sort of what was happening there on the South side. Really great sort of information. So you are really adding to the canon here. So I really appreciate your
Of
insight to
course.
that. And so you are going to raves or to different clubs. You're going to different clubs early on and getting to hear Green Day and some other sort of fantastic people. Were your parents okay with you? How old were you when you were going to these things? They just felt like it was safe. You could go, no issues on those lines in that area.
Yeah, no, that was a lot of deception on my part. You know, it was, you know, I apologize to my parents profusely for my behavior during those years. I'm sure I was a lot to deal with, but it was I just kind of had this I had this unspoken rule with my parents that as long as I kept my grades up and they didn't have to bail me out of jail. I was kind of, I'm also the youngest of three children. So they were pretty worn out by the time they had me. And I'm sure I was a handful. So all the good parenting, I think, went to my older siblings. But uh, yeah, it was lots of sneaking out, finding our friends that had a car sometimes and that all of us, uh, over capacity piling into someone's station wagon and heading out to the city to a rave or a club or something like that. So yeah, I wouldn't say they would probably mind, but I'm sure it's something they would rather not hear about, right? So there's just not really going to be dinner conversations with them, but um, really haven't had much big trouble with the law or anything in my life. So I'm trying to keep it that way, and hopefully they don't ever have to come bail me out of jail or anything. So.
Again, you have a very Chicago story. Everyone who went to the warehouse was probably under 17 and sneaking out of their parents' houses and stealing the cars and everyone piling into one car,
I mean,
taking the
that's
train.
part of the thrill of it, right?
That's the fun. That's the fun when you're young. You're like, Mom, I'm going over
Absolutely.
so-and-so's house. And then you're at the power plant, right? You're like, what? How did you get there?
And sometimes
Unfortunately,
the party wasn't even that great, but the whole act of like sneaking out and meeting up with your friends, going to maybe a map point to find out where the party is at, or meet new people that night because you're running from the cops and hiding in an alley, like all those kind of crazy things that would happen as part of being a kid. I think I'll always treasure that stuff.
that is great. All right, we will fast forward to you and the skateboard scene and you becoming more interested in music. Give me that transition. You're in sort of the skateboarding scene, which is still big time. It's an Olympic sport now, right? So that was big
Yeah,
time.
I
And
missed my
so
chance.
I just missed it. But how does that? So you were mentioning how that introduced you to new music forms. Talk to me a little bit
So,
about that because that's new. That's a
so
little bit to this
I,
conversation.
I was very lucky also in the way that my guitar teacher at the time, rest in peace, William Tucker, he was also involved in a bunch of bands like Ministry and Pigface, all these major Chicago industrial bands. So I kind of was just meeting uh, people in the music industry without knowing that I was meeting people in the music industry because they'd just be hanging out and this guy is teaching me how to play a Nirvana song or something silly. And later I find out this person is a very successful world touring musician. Um, and it's also around this time that I start seeing flyers for rave parties, right? So um, raves started popping off. And to me, this is something like I didn't even know what a rave really was, right? So um, it just was this kind of illegal all night party that would happen. And in Chicago, it was all about having a mixture of music. It wasn't all house, wasn't all techno, it wasn't all drum and bass. It was all these kind of different things going on. And uh, was lucky enough to go to some parties, heard techno, heard what was called hardcore at the time, and just really to me, when I'm not sure how much you listen to like uh, bands like Nirvana or Pearl Jam or like Red Hot Chili Peppers, this to me was when what I had considered underground music really hit the mainstream and became this kind of commercialized package. And so I made a hard turn away from rock music. And so to me at the time, house and techno felt very anonymous. It felt very true. It wasn't so much about this brand and selling this front man and they have this particular look and you fall in love with the singer or whatever it might be. house and techno was less about that. It was more about this DJ and the other people there. And I at the time also, do you remember the Rear at the Riv? They used to have these kind of house nights. So I started going there, and it was, it's the back of the Riviera, and you could go. It felt almost like very underground too, because it was very dark room. And this is also where I started hearing some of the like legends of house music, and you couldn't even see the DJ in this room, right? Like sometimes they'd have a stage laid out, but most of the time they're kind of off to the side. So this idea of music and the anonymity of it, and it being less about staring at this person on the stage and adoring them, and more about the experience of the whole group. And it became a very social thing for me too. I made a lot of friends, met people, and so that changed my outlook of, and even concept of music. So I was very lucky.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love to hear, again, the different places where you were sort of hearing this music and what you were being exposed to in that time. And at some point, I do want to get back to the fact that we discussed how the music scene started to change right around the anti-rave law, when these places had to shut down, people had to stop both promoting and DJing, etc. But one of the great things about those clubs, again, and the reason why we're here is because many of the DJs, they were so far in the background among the smoke. People loved the music, but they didn't know anything about who the DJs were, how they looked. Some
Right.
people care. We're just out, we're partying, sweating, that kind of thing, and we have no idea how this person looks and who they are. But that just tells you how important the music was, how it felt to people,
Absolutely.
that kind of thing. So you're involved in music scenes, you're meeting a lot of different people, etc. Tell me some of the influences, some of the people, some of the DJs who you actually got to know or wanted to hear more of, etc.
I'd say the folks that were really tolerated me as a fan, number one, right? And were nice to me. Number one, I think would always be DJ Hyperactive, who's now a very close friend of mine. Mike Dearborn was very early. Steve Poindexter. There was a fellow, Phil Freearts, John Curley from Medusa's and Shelter. Gosh, Derek Carter, DJ Heather, and I was such a fan to these people. I can't believe they tolerated me, right? I'd just be like, oh, what was that song? And I'd have like a notebook, and they're just getting off their set, and they're like, I don't remember what I played, right? And I'm like, okay. Phantom 45 and Danny the Wild Child and Justin Tune, DJ 3D. There were so many. As a party goer, there were so many personalities and great DJs that when you have a good experience with a DJ, and they're nice to you, and they're take that time to kind of tell you about what they're doing, and maybe even explain the music a little bit further. For a while, I didn't necessarily understand the differences in the genres, right? Like it was all kind of one thing to me, and maybe I felt it was different, but even now, I don't necessarily know these sorting lines that a lot of people use, but you know, these DJs taking the time to talk to somebody like me who's probably annoying and overexcited about what they're doing, it made such a huge difference, right? It made me think that, oh, this is a real person. This is something that if I'm interested in, maybe I can take a shot at this, or maybe I could, and you'd be surprised just on the other side how many people might be rude or off-putting, and you're like, I don't want to do that now because this person might act like this, or it seems so unachievable or so distant, kind of. But I think in the Midwest, we really lucked out with some really just kind people that were into the music for the right reasons, and they enjoyed sharing that with people. And I think maybe not everyone had that experience, but I was really lucky to have that experience myself.
I think what we've heard as we continue to research is certainly early on, people like my co-host Lori Branch and Kevin McFall, as sort of pioneers of the music form, they were learning from other pioneers. You know, Andre Hatchett says, "Yeah, let me just go down to my basement and I'll teach you how to play this." Craig Loftus and people from the power plant and the warehouse were like, "Hey, let me teach you these things." So house music has a really interesting history of sort of love, right? So if you want to learn, we're happy to teach you. But then, of course, there's also these rivalries that came across as well. You know, at
Oh,
summer,
absolutely.
yeah. So you have
And
that
that's
too.
just kind of human nature though, right? It's like as much as we try our best, we can do some dumb things and we can do some rude things. And all you can do is you know, try to not do it when you're aware of it. And at the same time, like rivalries and tribalism, as much as they are exclusionary, they're also about being inclusive, right? Because we had this group of friends or people that maybe nobody wanted to mess with or nobody gave the time of day. And we went off and we did our own thing. And then 10 years later, it's successful. And so now you want to include us. While
Mhm.
that's nice and all, there's going to maybe be this feeling of resentment there where you're like, no, you didn't want anything to do with us when this wasn't a profitable thing for you. So we're going
Right.
to be cautious about that. So, I think one of the things you were actually talking about, the kind of Chicago had its definite like regional things going on, depending on where you lived and where you grew up. There was a sound and a sometimes even a look, and everyone was kind of off doing their own thing because we really didn't have much internet back then, and what internet we did have was not great. So these pockets of subgenre and everyone kind of doing their own thing was just so common. And now looking back, we have these distinct sounds and distinct things people were doing. So yeah, maybe it was bad that there was a little bit of hating going on between groups and some competition and all those kind of things. And maybe some people were left out or excluded that shouldn't have been. But historically, looking back, we have these very distinct things because of that. So there is some positive out of that.
You know, with some rivalries is, you know, Bill's great character, Bill's great DJs, Bill's great whatever it is you're doing. I mean, that competition makes you better. One of the great things about Chicago early house is that there were DJ battles. So you're battling
Right.
your friends, but you're still
You
battling.
actually had to, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That I love a DJ battle. I'm desperate to have a DJ battle at WNUR. You know, I had a virtual DJ battle, which ended up in our new show called the DJ Spotlight. But I want some in-person DJ battles like back in the day. You know, I
Yeah.
just that would be so much fun. You know, and just have the
It's just,
crowd
it's
who
so,
won.
the rules have changed so much with technology and all these things. It's so hard to judge what is better now, though, right?
That's
Because there's
true.
you start adding all these things. But I guess all you can do is lay out these like growing up, or not even growing up, especially now, I go back and watch all these kind of DMC battles all the time, right? And see like Rectangle and Executioners and all these kind of scratch DJs and like what what a battle meant, right? Or even like a cipher between MCs and all this stuff. Um, and it made so much innovation. Like if you, I don't know how much you've watched like DMC scratch battles. Every year they have to top themselves because they know what happened the previous year. And it just got to this point of like ridiculousness where people are just doing like acrobatics and all these things that but as a consumer, maybe not participating in that, what a fun thing to watch, right?
It
So
is fun. It is fun. So who taught you how to DJ?
gosh, that's a tough one because I'm one of these people that I really thought I knew how to DJ for a little while. Like,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, what do you don't tell me how to do this. I don't need any advice. And man, I was terrible. I just couldn't recognize it. So um I'd say very early on, Lady D, Darlene, and Mel Hammond were two folks. So in high school, they lived above a store called the Alley on the north side, right?
Mhm.
And it's funny. I was just talking to Darlene about this. We can't even remember how we met, but I ended up hanging out with them at their house. Mel was in this very cool industrial band at the time, and was producing a bunch of bands early on. And he just kind of introduced me to this idea of beat matching and what that meant, right? And I didn't I didn't quite get it. I thought I got it for a long time, but I was also like playing records that shouldn't be played together, right? They just matched in speed, and so I thought, oh, this is DJing, right? And so, um, and then I'd say the folks that really honed me in, I'll give that to DJ Diesel Boy, who's a drum and bass DJ in Philadelphia. Really kind of sat me down one day and was like, you're you're doing this wrong, right? And what's like, if you did this particular way, and if you understand this concept, which at the time was phrasing, right, which was, things happening and executing in the right time, and how that's just as important as the beat being on together, right? In my
Right.
head, it was like, oh, the beats need to match up. The beats need to match up. I need to be good at beat matching and do this quickly, which in the end, that's just muscle memory, right? That's not about necessarily about selection, and it's not necessarily about things happening at the right moments, which is so important in music. So, um, yeah, and it was a lot of people, and it took a lot of people to kind of, and it took a lot of admitting on my part sometimes that I was not doing it correctly, because in my head I was like, oh, you know, yeah, I was just being a jerk, right? So um, I was lucky enough to have a lot of people around me, and a close enough friend group that could really tell me like, hey, you should do this correctly, and corrected me on those things. So um, yeah,
Well, we like a shout out here. We want to give some mad love to DJ Lady D, who's a friend of the show and partner to now in the Good Girls with Lowery Branch, and another WNUR DJ, DJ Vidi Girl. So it's, she's been so helpful to so many people in her career and her life. She's just a giving, wonderful
what
Southsider.
an amazing human. And it's funny. I actually saw Darlene this weekend, and I was telling her as well, like, in the industrial like punk rock scene as well, Darlene was there, and part of it, and like she gets her recognition in house, but like she was also such a big part of the rest of this kind of music scene that was going on as well. And I would appreciate if people kind of recognize that, because she turned me on to all sorts of amazing punk rock and goth music and all these other new wave things that were going on. And so um, just a real, she's so knowledgeable about music, and really shares with people. And so she's such a pivotal piece of Chicago that I can't express how grateful I am to her, and kind of sharing those things with me.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We know she's a creative and an artist and a historian in her own right. And again, a historian of music. Again, she reaches from all different parts of music to form what she does today, and has informed many people like yourself in, how to sort of blend these different music genres to create something beautiful, So thank you so much for sharing that. We actually did honor her and continue to honor her in a fantastic exhibit that we have called Chicago Home of House, that we just had exhibited at the Epiphany Art Center on Ashland in
Amazing.
Chicago. And we had a whole section devoted to DJ Lady D. But
Amazing.
what we might have left out is, again, sort of that industrial punk part of her genre, because we're the Vintage House Show. So we do a lot about vintage house music, right? So we delve into these other genres as it so informs, sort of other things, but we don't
Absolutely.
always. So it's really great that you shared that. So you've been you are really contributing to this music. And what we recognize is sort of we've done a lot to really sort of really memorialize the first wave of DJs, maybe that second wave. But we sometimes, you know, we're kind of lost on, we're trying to interview younger people, footwork DJs, you know, we're really sort of looking into, you know, what we missed in our scholarship here and how some of the younger generations have kept the music going, kept the music alive, you know, because again, people had to leave Chicago in 2000.
I think at the same time though, like there is so many pioneers in Chicago that have not gotten their dues, their
Exactly.
contributions haven't been recognized. That I any effort that is put towards that is more deserved, I feel, than any kind of this fourth wave stuff that me and maybe my contemporaries are doing, because that was they were doing things when it really mattered, right? And I'm not saying that being a DJ now doesn't matter, but I feel like back then when they pioneering sounds and really taking risks and really putting things out there and yeah, it's just made such an impact. So you know, all the time there's folks that um, you know, there were just so many people when house popped off, and even the second wave of house popped off. There's so many people, and there's so many people that just I think they still deserve more, right? They still deserve that recognition. I would love to see them DJing again. I would love for kids to hear them in the same context that I was and people before me were, because they are still that great, right? And I think there is opportunity out there for that to happen.
Yeah, we have dedicated an entire show again called the Spotlight to sort of bring forward some younger DJs, again, younger 22, 24, and some of the older DJs who just didn't, you know, they were DJing back in the day and were headlining a few things, but then life happened, right? And then,
Right, right,
and you know, laws happened, and of course, in our in our era, drugs happened, a lot of death happened, AIDS
right,
happened, a lot of people didn't make it to the next level because of this or that. And
right.
so we have spent a good part of our life here in the Vintage House Show uncovering some of those people, making sure that pioneers tell us who some of those people who influenced them were, so we can make sure to get them on the show and have them tell
I
their
love
story,
that.
things they've never done before. So tell me your first Chicago party that you were where you were the headliner, or the first place you played where you were sort of with some big people that you knew was important. You knew this was a stepping stone. And what years that
Gosh,
was?
oh, that's a tough one. So you know, what's funny is I've only so I took a long break from DJing. So I've only been DJing again for the last 5 years. And I would say um, before that break, it really just wasn't working, right? Things weren't catching the way I wanted them to. My attitude about things was not great. You know, there's a lot of jealousy, and there was a lot of me seeing my peers and friends doing things, and a lot of me thinking, why isn't that me? Or, you know, how come I can't get that? And all these people are getting these opportunities, I'm not. And you know, that it started to kind of drown out, I think, what I was doing. I would say one of the things that I got to play the movement festival, um, and that was one of the things that I
Wait,
was like, it doesn't get any better than this. Gosh, what year was this? I'm gonna have to look this up. This is like late 2000s, maybe
late
2011,
2000. Okay.
2011 or so. I'm probably totally off on this, but um, after getting the chance to play this festival, which I had set as this like life goal, I was like, I'm done. It doesn't get any better than this for me.
Right.
I've been struggling to make it as a DJ, and it's not been working out. So I basically stopped DJing after I had done that gig. Maybe it's
Wow.
2008. I can't remember, but I'd taken this break, and I continued to help other people produce music and record bands and record other artists as a recording engineer, but not really creating music or DJing anymore. I just kind of, it felt like, especially for me after raves, everything after that, the club scenes and everything else that followed, it just didn't seem to have the same attachment um, with me. And then also life happened, right? Like you said, responsibilities, needing to take care of things. It just didn't seem right anymore. So I had bowed out. But I would definitely say that the show in 2009 or so, I'll have to look that up sometime. But that just felt like, "Oh, this is as good as it gets." I'm feeling so great about this. Let's leave music on this high
I know.
point. So. Uh,
So I know that you travel quite a bit, or certainly you did before COVID. Talk to me about your first overseas gig and how you felt. Where was it? Who were you with? And how you felt about being sort of on overseas? How did that make you feel as a DJ?
the first post-COVID overseas gig?
No, no, no. Beforehand, like early in your career.
Oh,
So where
before.
were you with your
Okay.
first?
So early in my career, I would say my first post or my first overseas gig, it was a warehouse party, or it's not even a warehouse. I guess it looks like a warehouse. It's a club in Berlin. My friends Angel Alanis and Submerge just kind of talked to the promoter and convinced them that I was good enough to play the show. And so there's a lot of culture shock. I was also very grateful for these two friends of mine to kind of vouch for me because, of course, this promoter is not going to know who I am at all, right? So that was really great. That was gosh, I was like probably like 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, before I even had really decided to start DJing again seriously. And that was one of the experiences that made me decide to start DJing again. And those two fellas who I've been friends with for a really long time were always kind of encouraging me to start DJing again. And they're like, "Why aren't you doing this with us?" And they're both wildly successful at the time. And I was just like, I want to stay home and play video games and, kind of do that stuff instead. But yeah, luckily I changed my mind.
Well, you have great friends. That is fantastic. And it's a great place. What a great place to start overseas in Berlin, sort of the hub of techno activity. Um, that's really fantastic. So was that your first time in Germany, or had you been there before, seeing sort of the flow, just hanging out, or did you do
I,
that
I
when you
had
were there?
I luckily had gone there as a tourist and kind of still maybe snuck off to some parties here and there. So I still was always a fan and listener and consumer of techno and house. That never went away. It just kind of felt like my place and time in it just didn't feel like it was lining up. So just kind of decided at that time, I just want to be a dancer. I just want to pay my cover and
Right.
enjoy it for what it is.
That's, you know what? Oh, wow, you just sparked another thing that I'm always desperate to investigate. Half of the DJs that I'm familiar with that we get to see, I always feel like can't really dance. Some people really, and some people are really dancing behind the decks and
Sure.
just partying. And some people I'm like, can they dance or are they just sort of moving side to side? Like, I don't know. I like a dancing DJ. So you were a dancer. You were out there dancing.
Not really. That's an exaggeration. Especially when I DJ, I probably am maybe one of the most static humans that when I play, it's I'm kind of a socially awkward person, number one. Number two, I have some physical limitations that keep me from like cutting a rug maybe more than other people. Um, and to me, kind of dancing is more of like this scenario. But as a DJ, um, I'm generally so wrapped up in what I'm doing
hmm
And it's also I'm one of those folks that like if I look up and I make the wrong eye contact with somebody, like it could screw everything up. And eh,
Yes.
you know, I'm as an artist, I'm trying to do better about like connecting. Because listen, if I were watching me just staring at the decks and doing, I'd be pretty bored myself. So you know, I've gone back and looked at some of my sets, and I'm like, can you look up once in a while and maybe like engage with folks? But I forget. So um, if you ever see me like really dancing behind the decks, it's because I'm having a hard time sometimes because I'm having a hard time catching a vibe or a rhythm. I'm not
Mm.
necessarily getting the feedback I need from the crowd, or I can't hear it. So I'm having to like physically kind of improvise and it's almost like I'm counting in my head the steps because I'm not able to like easily mix this thing. So or I'm a little inebriated. It's one or the others if you ever see me moving around behind the turntable. So it's something I'm trying to do more. But as a consumer, to a DJ needs to be doing something, right? Whether it is some very intensive mixing or creativity. And sometimes the folks that are dancing a lot, they're doing so because they've got nothing else to do while they're DJing, right? So it's just, and that's not a general rule because there are some very technically skilled DJs that are also amazing dancers, right? And sometimes the there's people you're going to stare at more than other people, right? And sometimes it's for physical genetics reasons. This person is such a like genetic gift to God that you can't stop staring at them. You're like, you're so beautiful, you're so handsome. And so they're used to people staring at them their whole life, right? And so maybe they're a little bit more comfortable being performative or people looking at them in that way. Um, so, and it's also as festivals and the way people engage with DJs has changed, they're really on the stage on this giant thing where you can see them and there's a camera on them and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you kind of need to do something in those things, right? If your face is being rebroadcast to 15,000 people, if you're like this the entire time, that's a waste of camera. And, you know, there's somebody working this camera the whole time and all that. And, you know, you want to help them out too, because they're like, give me something, right? Give me some actionable thing to put on the screen or something. So yeah, I think it's either one. I do like seeing sometimes, especially a DJ who's really, I want to see a DJ that's into their music, whether it is through dancing or whether it is being completely absorbed in what they're doing um, on stage. But then you can also tell those folks that they're dancing because they feel like they have to, right? And it's not because they're necessarily um, really feeling that vibe, right? And it's going to be up to interpretation, right? Your perception of somebody is going to be different from mine, whether or not they're dancing because their manager told them to, or a DJ they look up to dances a specific way and that worked for them. Um, People are smart. They can tell when someone is being genuine or not. And I think it's that you're going to pick up on that from them. So if their genuine state is introverted and closed down and really kind of working on this thing. But me as a consumer, when I'm paying a fee to go to a show, I want to see this artist really into what they're doing, right? If someone is just kind of dialing it in and they're tired because they've been on tour for 3 months and they're kind of like, you know that, right? You can pick up on that. And I don't feel the value for my money as a customer then, right? I'm like, this person doesn't even want to be there and I can feel that. So why am I paying 100 euros to see them, right? That's not fair. So yeah.
Well, it's a new day. It's a new day. Again, some time ago, again, we barely even saw the DJs. They were in a cloud of smoke. They were up high or they were down low. And people were just there
Yeah.
to hear music. We knew that DJ brought the heat and we were there to see it, whether it was Ron Hardy or or Frankie or whomever that was. We were just there to enjoy the music. Really didn't care who that person is. Now it is a completely different ball game as techno and EDM have become, more mainstream. You are a performer. You are the headliner. People want to see you. We want to see
People
pyrotechnics.
people want to know about their life. They want to know
Right,
their
exactly.
politics. They want to know their alignment. They want to know what they ate for dinner. And maybe back in the day, I didn't want to know anything about you, right? And and most of the time, especially folks that were innovators in their genre, they were the nerdiest people, right? Because they're sitting there learning the drum machine, they're sitting there
Exactly.
learning this process, and maybe they're not the folks that are like taking that second look in the mirror and making sure they look perfect before they go out the door. So it's become different. I think the pressures are different, and I don't think it's any better or worse, right? Because it's not the artist's fault, right? That I care about their politics or who they voted for, or that's me, right? I'm in my head thinking, I don't like this guy because they voted for Trump. I will never go see them, or whatever it might be. They're going to be who they're going to be, and they're going to live their life as a human. However, but I think in recent times, especially because on the internet information is available and their comments and posts and all these things are out there. And if you have social media and if you're an artist and you have a public page or an account, you're putting that out there for people to consume on purpose, right? You're
Exactly.
purposefully writing, I want you to know this about me. If this is like, if it's not just you and your friends and you're like Lego club or Transformers club and talking in a closed circle, you're then throwing this thing out there and saying, know this about me. So you
Mhm.
can't help but put that in part of the equation on when you think about someone, right? Like as much as mentally you block, like like, let's say you tell yourself that you don't care about politics, right? And you want to separate politics from music, but this person supported something that was very wrong or evil or something that goes against your own morality. How can then maybe you can, some people can, but personally, it's hard for me then to enjoy the music in the same way. It doesn't make the music any worse or better, but it's just this nagging thing in your head that you are like, man, this sucks about this person, or maybe it doesn't even suck. You just don't like that, right? So me as a paying customer or a participant or something, it's fair for me to say I don't like that, and then not engage it in that same way. So
I think it's an interesting time in internationally where we are all sort of siloed by some of our personal preferences, and that affects everything that we do professionally, personally, creatively, and people will judge. But we all have the opportunity to leave information off or support what we want to support, or not be on social media. But unfortunately, to market yourself these days, you have to be somewhere on the internets, as they say, so
absolutely.
you have to do it. And so again, here we are back to, why we're talking to you. You're going to be at the ARC festival coming up in Union Park, September 4th and 5th, Labor Day weekend here in Chicago. So happy to have you in here in Chicago and be able to, inform all of the people who might come from all over the country or all over the world to see you here and represent Chicago. Because, Chicagoans, we want you to represent Chicago. We want you to know that a little bit of that history. We want people to know that this is the birthplace, and we see you. We're going to talk about, this Chicagoan who was representing us across the globe. Talk to me a little bit about your style. What should they expect at the ARC Festival coming up Labor Day?
So yeah, I'm super excited about this festival. I think it's one of the few festivals in the city that I feel like has, although there is a lot of international acts, this is one of the festivals that I feel like has made an effort to say we are recognizing and representing Chicago. And maybe it's not maybe it could have been awesome if every artist was from Chicago or more artists were from Chicago, or there was representation in different ways. This is what we have, and I think it's better than it has been in the past. And so I think this is also a good litmus test to see, in
Mm,
the end, everyone can say, yeah, I would love to see these local DJs, represent at these large festivals, but do they really? Are they
right.
going to show up? Are they going to? The only way in the end, we can't ask a promoter to lose money on us, right? Like, let's sink all this money where if they had XX DJ there, there's going to be a certain amount of people there. And though morally they feel this obligation to represent Chicago and the sound and maybe this music that they personally believe in more, if people don't show up and say, this is actually what we want to, these things aren't going to ever happen again. They're going to say like, oh, that was a mistake.
Mm,
Nobody was there when Hiroko or DC was on or whatever was happening. But um, it's an honor to be on a lineup with somebody like Heather and somebody like Derek Carter and Gene Ferris and Steve Gerrard um, and Pierre. There's these are amazing artists that I would never personally group myself with. So it's really nice. It's nice to be included in something like that.
Well, that is fantastic. Please, Hiroko, please tell us all your social media handles, where we can see you between now and the ARC Festival. Give us the details so we can continue to promote where you are.
Fantastic. So you can find me on Instagram at Hiroko, Hiroko __ Yamamura, Yamamura. My Instagram has nothing to do with music. It's just stupid pictures all the time. But that's what Instagram is for. It's for pictures. You can also find my name on Facebook and just various social medias. I think there's two of me in the world. So you can probably figure out which one is me.
Right.
Next week I will be at Spy Bar with my friends Dubfire and Sophia Says. Very excited to go back there. I will be in Los Angeles in a couple weeks, and some other shows that haven't been announced yet, but I will see you all on the coast. Hopefully, I will be seeing people at the Amsterdam dance event in October. We're just kind of waiting for the world to start letting Americans travel overseas. So, kind of staying close to the science on this one, observing. Want to make sure people are safe and events are happening responsibly. But I've also been sitting in my house for a year and a half, and I'm ready to kind of get back to work. So let's not be reckless about it, but let's also I'm excited to see everybody again soon.
We want to hear the music. We want to see the music in person. We don't want to see it on Zoom and etc. People want to get out there,
I'm
but
over
again,
it.
to
I'm
be
over
safe.
it. I'm over it. Yeah,
Yeah, we have to continue to be safe so we don't have to go backwards in time. So hopefully we will do
absolutely.
that. Please, 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 audience, check out the ARC Music Festival and DJ Hiroko Yamamura. Labor Day weekend, check it out. Support, as she sang. WNUR will be there. Check it out. I'm not sure if we're going to be trying to live stream some of it. I'm sure we're going to try our best to, but keep it locked to 89.3 FM and WNUR.org to make sure that you are in tune with what's happening that weekend. And we will continue to share where you are, Hiroko, across the world. We will continue to make sure that our audience knows who you are and continues to support. And hopefully maybe we can get you in studio. Maybe we can get DJ Lady D to come in and hang out. We can all hang out together in studio. So thank you so much again
Thank you.
for
I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I think if there's any message I have to the audience, please do research and understand the roots of house in Chicago. I think the importance and historical value of what you all are doing and its effect on what is music today is so important, and there's so many unsung heroes in Chicago that I would love to see get their dues finally. And I think now with the internet and now with everybody sharing information, this is actually the perfect time for this to happen. So yeah, stay locked to this show.
Thank you so much. Again, check out the ARC Music Festival at arcmusicfestival.com. Get your tickets there. Also very important, get the tickets. I didn't share where to get them. They're like, where am I going to get these tickets? So arcmusicfestival.com. Check it out. Continue to support the Vintage House Show, vintagehouseshow.com, .org, and .us. Check us out. Radio, music, and podcast. So you can't see it all, but keep it locked. Thank you so much for participating. Again, DJ Hiroko Yamamura, and we wish you the best of luck in your continued career. And we look forward to hearing more and more internationally about what you're going to do and how you're representing. Okay?
Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.